It was a late summer evening in 2019 when I found myself driving through the Mojave Desert, exhausted after a long hiking trip. The sun had just set, painting the horizon in shades of deep orange and purple, and the endless highway seemed to vanish into darkness. My car's fuel gauge was dangerously close to empty, and the GPS on my phone flickered and died as if the desert itself was swallowing the signal. I had no choice but to keep going, hoping to spot something, anything that resembled civilization. In the distance, a flicker of neon caught my eye. A small motel, glowing like a ghostly oasis. The sign read, "Sunset Motel, Vacancy," though the paint was chipped and the flickering light made the letters appear jagged and distorted. Relief and trepidation filled me at the same time. I'd read about isolated motels being hotspots for all kinds of strange occurrences, but my desperation overruled caution. I pulled into the gravel parking lot. The building looked decades old, with peeling teal paint, rusted railings, and an overgrown patch of weeds where flowers should have been. A single figure sat behind the front desk, a man who looked decades older than his age, hunched over with a cigarette dangling from his lips. He didn't look up as I entered the lobby, his gaze fixed on something beyond the counter. I asked, "Room for the night?" He muttered something incomprehensible, then pointed to a key hanging on a nail behind him. I took it, paid cash, and made my way to the room. The narrow hallway smelled of damp carpet and stale air, the walls stained with watermarks. As I turned the key and entered the room, a chill hit me. The room was small, furnished with a single bed, a rickety nightstand, and a dresser with drawers that looked like they hadn't been used in years. Dust motes floated in the dim light, giving the space an almost ethereal quality. I unpacked quickly, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. By the time I laid down, the sun had fully disappeared, leaving the desert outside in an absolute darkness that seemed to press against the windows. Around 11:45 p.m., I was woken by a sound. Soft, measured, tapping against the window. At first I told myself it was the wind or a loose branch hitting the glass, but the rhythm was deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, heart hammering, and stared at the window. The moonlight cast silver shadows across the room, but the alley outside was empty. A cold breeze whispered through the cracked frame, brushing against my arm like a warning. Then, faintly, I heard a whisper, barely audible, raspy, and chilling. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. The voice was low, almost metallic, and it seemed to come from all around me, though I was certain I was alone. My hand shook as I checked the locks on the door and window. Everything was secure. My phone was dead. I was trapped, with nothing but the darkness and the presence I could feel pressing in from every corner of the room. Hours passed. The tapping evolved into scratches, sharp, deliberate marks against the wooden frame of the window and door. Drawers in the dresser shifted slightly, opening just enough to create a whisper of sound. The chair by the window creaked as if someone had leaned against it. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but the thought of running down the long, dark hallway was paralyzing. By 2 a.m., I was fully awake, listening. The scratching had stopped, replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible breathing. I could hear it moving in the room, soft footsteps across the carpet that made no sense. It didn't walk like a human. The movements were jagged, uneven, unnatural. My stomach churned as I realized the room was not just occupied, it was alive, responding to me in ways that made no rational sense. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, pointing it at every corner. At first, nothing. Then, in the far corner, a shadow began to solidify, forming a tall, thin figure. Its outline was black, featureless, yet undeniably human in shape. It tilted its head slowly, almost examining me, and whispered again, "Leave, or stay forever." I bolted from the room, fumbling with the keys, heart pounding like a drum. The lobby was empty. The old man at the front desk had vanished without a trace. Outside, the desert wind whipped around my car as if it were trying to pull me back. I started the engine and drove off, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. The highway stretched endlessly before me, the neon sign of the Sunset Motel disappearing in the rearview mirror, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. Every flicker of shadow on the roadside, every gust of wind, seemed infused with the memory of that figure. Weeks later, curiosity made me look for the Sunset Motel online. The listing had vanished. No reviews, no address, nothing. As if it had never existed. But I knew the truth. The figure, the whispering, the presence that had lingered in that room, it was real. And I know, deep in the desert, the Sunset Motel waited.
19, when I found myself driving through the Mojave Desert, exhausted after a long hiking trip. The sun had just set, painting the horizon in shades of deep orange and purple, and the endless highway seemed to vanish into darkness. My car's fuel gauge was dangerously close to empty, and the GPS on my phone flickered and died as if the desert itself was swallowing the signal. I had no choice but to keep going, hoping to spot something, anything that resembled civilization. In the distance, a flicker of neon caught my eye, a small motel, glowing like a ghostly oasis. The sign read, Sunset Motel. Vacancy. Though the paint was chipped, and the flickering light made the letters appear jagged and distorted. Relief and trepidation filled me at the same time. I had read about isolated motels being hotspots for all kinds of strange occurrences, but my desperation overruled caution. I pulled into the gravel parking lot. The building looked decades old, with peeling teal paint, rusted railings, and an overgrown patch of weeds where flowers should have been. A single figure sat behind the front desk, a man who looked decades older than his age, hunched over with a cigarette dangling from his lips. He didn't look up as I entered the lobby, his gaze fixed on something beyond the counter.
It was early December 2021 when I decided to take a solo trip to the Rockies. The winter had just set in and the roads were slick with ice, snow dusting the pine-covered peaks. I had booked a small motel tucked away in a mountain pass, somewhere quiet, far from tourists, somewhere I could write and think. The listing had promised isolation, warmth, and a fireplace. Perfect. When I arrived, the sun was setting, throwing long shadows across the uneven parking lot. The motel was rustic, built from dark-stained logs, with smoke curling lazily from a single chimney. The sign read, Whispering Pines Motel, its letters carved in wood, slightly tilted from age. No other cars were parked outside, and an unsettling silence hung in the crisp mountain air. I walked to the front desk. The owner was a thin man, early 60s, wearing a worn flannel shirt. He handed me the key without a word, merely nodding toward the second floor. Room 7. Don't go outside after dark, he muttered. I smiled politely, dismissing the warning as an old man's superstition. The room was small but cozy, a queen bed, a desk, and a stone fireplace. The room smelled faintly of pine and burning wood, but something else lingered beneath, damp, almost like decay. I dropped my bag and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. Around 10:30 p.m., as I sat by the fireplace writing in my journal, I heard the faint crunch of footsteps outside my door. The snow was falling steadily, muffling most sound, yet the steps were deliberate, pacing, circling the room. I froze, thinking perhaps another guest had come in, but the motel was empty. Knock, knock, knock. The sound came from the door itself, slow and insistent. My heart raced. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Nothing. The snow swirled outside, the landscape serene and untouched. Yet the sense of being watched grew heavier with every passing second. Then came a whisper, barely audible, as if someone was right behind me. You shouldn't be here. I spun around. The room was empty. My stomach knotted. I locked the door again, pulled the curtains shut, and tried to focus on my writing. But the noise continued. Soft footsteps circling the bed, the scrape of nails along the wooden floor, the rustle of the curtains despite the closed window. Around 1 a.m., I woke to the sound of the fireplace popping violently, even though the fire had burned down to embers. I sat up, flashlight in hand. That's when I saw it. A shadow, massive and featureless, leaning against the far wall. It didn't walk. It glided, unnatural and smooth, moving closer with every second. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure stopped at the foot of the bed, a dark void that pressed against the air, almost suffocating. Then a guttural whisper, low and menacing. Stay forever. I bolted from the bed, fumbling for the door. The figure moved with me, silent, relentless. My hands shook as I turned the knob, but the door wouldn't budge. I slammed my shoulder against it once, twice, finally breaking free. I ran down the stairs, the old wooden boards creaking under my weight, the shadow gliding behind me until I reached the lobby. The owner wasn't there. The desk was empty, the lights flickering. Outside, the snowstorm raged, turning the world into a white void. I ran to my car, scraping snow off the windshield, fumbling with the keys. When I finally started the engine and looked back at the motel, I saw it. The figure, standing in the second-floor window, watching me leave. A black silhouette, featureless, unmoving. I drew for hours before I could shake the feeling of being followed. Every flicker of shadow in my rearview mirror made my pulse spike. That night I realized it wasn't the cold, the snow, or even the isolation that made the motel terrifying. It was the intruder itself, something that shouldn't exist, something that thrived on the fear of its guests. Weeks later, I tried to find the Whispering Pines Motel online. There was no record of it, no reviews, no address, no mention of a mountain pass by that name. And yet I knew the truth. The motel existed, and the figure, the intruder, waits there still, patient, watching for the next traveler, foolish enough to stay. Even now, months later, when I hear scraping on the floor at night or feel a shadow brush past me, I remember that dark, featureless shape in room 7. And I know that some places are not abandoned. Some are waiting.